Hey all. So first up, thank you very much, Joseph, for inviting me here. I know this is a topic that's a bit unorthodox for this conference, but it is a topic that has been very, very close to my heart even before I joined and started working on Ethereum. So that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you guys about it. And the other reason was because although I think for most of you, this is not something that's in your active areas of interest currently, it is something that in the next 5 to 10 years will be very, very actively developed. So I think it's the opportune moment to try to steer it in the direction that we kind of prefer and we would like to see it go. First up, this is my favorite picture of this year. What you can see here is simple cell division. Essentially, in every living organism on this planet, whenever it multiplies, whenever it grows, what happens is that you have a starting cell, it duplicates its entire internal organs, and then it just splits into 2. And that splits into 4, 8, 16, etc. Essentially, it goes through this explosive exponential growth. And what's really amazing in this is that, for one, when a human baby is born, it consists of 2 trillion cells, but when it is conceived, it's consisting of 1 single cell. So essentially, every single one of us in this room at some point was a 0.1 millimeter dot. And the implications are wonderful, because what this means is that if each of us in this room was at some point 0.1 millimeter dot, it means that that single 0.1 millimeter dot contained our entire blueprint. So for the entire history of medicine, what doctors always kept looking at is that, well, some body part is failing, some organ is failing, but they never really looked at why is it failing. And all of a sudden, if we can look at our blueprint, if we can just figure out how that body part was built up, then we can actually tell why it is failing. And this was demonstrated 80 years ago. So approximately 80 years ago, somebody demonstrated that, yes, the cell contains the genetic material. Every single cell in our body does contain a genetic material. And about 64 years ago, it was mapped out exactly how that little material looks like, that it is a double helix, that it is a base 4 encoded data blob. Now, the problem was that even though this was demonstrated 60 years ago how it looks like, nobody actually had the idea how to pull it out and interpret it. And it took us north of 50 years and tens of billions of dollars of engineering to somehow pull that blueprint out of the cells. Which leads us to where we are currently today. We are actually capable of taking 1 single cell out of a human body, breaking it open to pull out that genetic material, that blueprint that defines all of us, to digitize the whole thing, and then try to interpret it. And the first part is very easy. You can do it at home with dish soap. You just dissolve the cell membrane. That's the kitchen table approachable thing. The second part is fairly complicated. One of the leading ways that it is done currently is that they take the strand of DNA, pull it through a small magnetic hole, and the interference that it causes, basically you can monitor what electrical interference it causes, and based on that, figure out what's inside the DNA. That's a fairly expensive procedure, but depending on the lab, you can get it done for $200, $400. If you want to do it at home, you can get it done for $10,000. It's both of these are kind of solved problems, in my opinion. So ideally, it will get cheaper in the future. Ideally, if you are privacy conscious, there will be better ways to do it in the future, but it's solved. Now, the third step is the problematic step. So we can take our blueprint out of the cell. We can digitize, or officially it's called sequence our DNA. But then how do we interpret it? As it turns out, the DNA is about a 3.2 gigabase long binary code. Actually, it's a base 4 code, which encodes the entire human body, except we have no idea, for the most part, what it does. And currently, the solution is that, well, we'll just give it to 3, 5 companies in the world who try to interpret it for us. It is a big player's game. And the problem here is that you can look at your blueprint kind of similar to how you look at a private key. once you give it out, there's no coming back. So you can't really revoke access to your genome. So it's something very, very personal. And not only does it affect you, it affects your parents, your children, your siblings. It's shared across a lot of people. So giving your genome out to everybody is a problem. And it will become a bigger and bigger problem as we go forward. However, interpreting your genome does have the advantage of that solve all disease motto. So if you can actually decipher yourself, you can interpret how all your little gory details are built up, then you have a chance of finding bugs and fixing bugs in it. So the question is, can we do better? Now, the first two steps, the industry is constantly working on doing better. The third step, nobody's working on getting it done better because it's not really worthwhile. And this is where I'm coming in. That it's, if we think about it, we've been in this situation before. So when in the 80s, before the internet and the open source movement became a phenomenon, everything was running on big IBM mainframes or Apple systems, Sun systems, and that was the normal. You just bought your computer, you bought all your hardware, and that hardware did exactly what you wanted to do. Not so long ago, in finance, we had the same thing. We had a few big banks, they defined the rules, and we just played ball. And in both of these cases, we demonstrated that it is actually possible to break out of these systems. And I don't really want to call it necessarily break out, because it's, I don't consider it a malicious system. It's rather initially when you start with something novel, very, very new, then obviously a handful of companies foot the bill, and they try to remake their money. But once it's kind of proven that it is something of interest, that's when people start building. That's when people try to get around, get their hands dirty. And the interesting thing is both of these systems, I was trying to figure out what's the common. So they are wildly, wildly different movements, the open source movement and the Ethereum financial network. And in my opinion, you can identify approximately 3 major pillars that are necessary to break out of one of these systems. One of them is sovereignty. So up until the point when computing was locked up in a system administrator big mainframe, you couldn't really do anything. You had to ask for permission from the administrator. You couldn't work on weekends. It was kind of like completely locked down sensors. It's kind of somewhat similar to what Anthropic is doing now with Claude. If you try to do something that they don't really like, your account gets banned. So it's, in this climate, it's very, very hard to experiment, very, very hard to build. And if you cannot experiment and build on your own terms, that you're simply not going to do it. The other thing is extensibility. When Windows or the personal computer appeared, then all of a sudden we had a hardware that we owned. We could run various computations on it. But when Microsoft actually provided SDKs, that's when really the whole building programs kind of blew up, because then all of a sudden everybody who had access to a developer environment could start writing their own applications, and they could just go wild. They could do whatever they want. And finally, these two are kind of not enough, because what these two result in is you will have very geeky people showing off their home automation systems. It's very nice, except it doesn't really help other people. And that's where the third pillar comes in. You want shareability. You want a system where you can actually share your work, and others can actually build on top of your work. Oops, that's not supposed to happen. And that's essentially what I'm trying to provide solutions for. So the first pillar, what I said is we want to do sovereignty. Now, in the case of genomics, as I told you, you can actually have your genome sequenced. You can save, you can take it out from the lab and shove it on your laptop. The problem is that if you look at the genome as a private key, you don't really like holding a private key on your laptop. You don't really like holding a private key on an internet-connected machine. But even with a private key, at least if it's stolen, you have a chance of rolling it. In your genome, once it's gone, it's gone. I mean, it's gone for life. There's no building up a new, at least with funds, if it's stolen, you can start over. With your genome, if it's stolen forever. And then the solution is obviously coming from a crypto crowd, is to go down the path of a hardware wallet. And the nice thing about the hardware wallet is it provides a lot of very, very elegant guarantees. Now, in the case of genomics, we can use similar guarantees, but there are a few interesting quirks. One of them is that a private key is 32 bytes. A genome is 3.2 gigabytes. A transaction that we want to sign on a private key is kilobytes at max. An application that we would run an analysis on our genome is megabytes to hundreds of megabytes, potentially even larger. So it's going down the path of having some small embedded enclave device that just does everything on chip is out of the question. And the solution was to actually create a much more powerful device that's capable of a lot of stuff, but the downside is that you lose some of the security guarantees. And the way I kind of imagine redoing the security guarantees is to introduce a two-factor authentication into the entire system, where all cryptography, all authentication is actually split between two hardware devices. One of them is doing everything, the number crunching, the storage, etc. And the other device actually handling all the authentication, all the authorization, including cryptographic keys to unlock the first device. This also has a very, very elegant second use case that if you ever want to take your genome, your health data to a physician, you can actually do it. You can actually take the device to them and give it to them whilst still retaining full control over the data. This is, again, something wildly different versus a hardware wallet, because a hardware wallet you never, ever give out. There's no reason to give it out. Your health data, there might be sometimes good enough reasons to share it with a physician. Now, the problem is that in this view, this device would be a glorified flash drive, an encrypted flash drive. So it's pillar one. It's kind of, it allows you to store and have your own data secure. However, it does not really allow you to operate on it. So what we kind of still need to do is solve secure data execution. In the case of a hardware wallet, secure data execution is simply a transaction that you sign on the wallet. In the case of genomic data, we need much, much more. And what we need to do is we need to be able to allow arbitrary people, arbitrary applications written by arbitrary scientists, people, PhD students, whatever, to run on the device and still have all the security measures in place. And the solution there is, again, something inspired from the Ethereum world, where you can actually run the whole thing sandboxed inside the virtual machine. Now, in the case of Ethereum, what the virtual machine is really, really limited, because it needs to run a global network of applications. In the case of genomics, it only needs to run your stuff, which means we can make it much, much more powerful. So there's no need to reinvent something like the EVM. Rather, we can go straight to WASM. It's kind of like one of the big challenges that Ethereum tried and failed to solve. That's a nice part, that in this specific scenario, it is possible. And, but that only prevents running inside a WASM application still only allows us to protect the device itself from external code. But how do we protect the user data on the device? And the solution there is that all the data is exposed via a small virtual file system, and every application needs to ask for permission to access specific data on that file system. And since we have our two-factor security with the mobile phone acting as our glorified remote control, we can actually authorize every single data access, including when an application runs and generates a report, we can authorize whether we accept that report, whether we share that report outside. And of course, we can also create, since it's a locked down device, we can create a whole audit trail for every single action the device ever did. And what this allows us to do is to take a completely random application, completely random genomic analysis from the internet, and run it locally against our genome. And that screenshot is actually one of those things that I did. It's a cilantro app, which essentially, cilantro is a spice. Most of the people hate it. And there is a well-defined genetic link, whether you hate that spice or you love that spice. And I just wrote a little application that ran on one of these devices against my own genome and kind of told me that I kind of semi-hate it only. So it's a fun demo project. But the idea here is that being the whole platform being based on a WASM virtual machine with cryptography in place, with the whole thing being locked down, you can run arbitrary untrusted code from the internet. That's kind of pillar 2. But how do we do the last pillar? It's kind of, we can do secure, we have our genome sovereignty. We have execution that we can build on it, arbitrary stuff. But if we can't share it, then we still have no way of creating an ecosystem out of it. And here the solution is kind of like somewhere aiming between an Apple App Store and an Ethereum network. What the App Store does is it brings us simplicity. So you have the iPhone, you have a device, and you can just search the App Store for applications, you install it, you run it. It is actually possible to do exactly the same thing, to create an App Store where you can have open, closed apps, free or monetized apps, and anybody can just find genomic apps that they like, they can just hit run, and it runs. But if we look at Ethereum, one of the powerful things about Ethereum was composability. One smart contract can use any other smart contract in the network. And this gives us, this is why Ethereum became popular. This is why the whole open source movement, this is why GitHub exists, because people are constantly building on top of each other's work. So if we permit these applications to generate sub-results, and then other applications can use it, then we solve this issue where you have a centralization in the hands of just a handful of users. For example, you can have one app that just does Alzheimer. You can have another app that does heart attack or heart sensitivity. And you can have a third app which just recombines these and goes wild. And with these kind of 3 pillars, you have a very, very, you kind of lay the base work to open the whole thing up so that arbitrary people can build their own app, can share their own app, and try to somehow, instead of having to give our genome to some company to interpret it for us, we can actually try to interpret pieces, bits and bobs ourselves, and gradually expand outward and build up an ecosystem. Now, the question that many people here will ask is, but this whole thing that I'm talking about is very nice, but now LLMs are all the rage, and we want Claude to do it for us. And the answer is that that is a brilliant direction, and which is completely compatible. With Claude, or with any other LLM, the advantage is that you can pinpoint them to some scientific paper that was published yesterday. They can just read it, and they can do meaningful analysis based on it. The problem is that if you do this and you just give all your data to Claude, then you very, very much lose control over it. In this specific model, you can have Claude, instead of accessing your data directly, you can have it simply write these applications for you. And if there are little applications, the little pieces of puzzles that you can gradually build on top, it means that the LLMs don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch every time, that they don't have to, you don't have to be afraid that some hallucination somewhere deep down the pipeline produces some very, very weird results, because it can just reuse every single app that already exists, and it can just fine-tune the exact final details that are relevant to you. The other crowd that usually people tell me is that, no, this is the wrong approach. The correct approach is to use fully homomorphic encryption. Now, fully homomorphic encryption, what it does is that this is the bleeding edge of medicine nowadays. You encrypt your data, and then you can send that encrypted data to anybody. They can number crunch on it, and they send you back the results. That's awesome. The problem is that your DNA is 3 gigabytes in size, 3.2 gigabases. So if you encrypt that, and every time you want to run your analysis, you just have to upload 3.2 gigabases to a lab, that lab is not going to like it. And currently, the bleeding edge solution is simply that, well, we'll store the genome for you, we will encrypt it for you, and we will promise not to lose it. Yeah. So whereas the underlying idea of fully homomorphic encryption works, the current implementation does not. And in this model, if you have a little hardware device that holds your genome or holds any other health data, it is actually, you can have that device do the encryption. So it is absolutely compatible with the entire idea of how things should operate. And lastly, people often ask me that, yes, but if I have my data on one device and my wife has her data on another device, etc., how can we do combined analysis? And it is actually fully compatible because you can do zero-knowledge proofs. And if you can do zero-knowledge proofs and get the zero-knowledge proofs off of the device, then you can actually cross-combine them and do various other analysis. So what I was trying to prove here is that the problem with genomics nowadays is that not that people or companies are necessarily evil, simply it is too early. And it is, we're in a point in time when these things are we are just getting able to build these things. And it's kind of up to us to define what direction we want to take these genomics out. And coming from an Ethereum world, my obvious answer is that I would prefer to see genomics in a more self-sovereign way. And I think we do have the capacity to actually go and build it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Do we have questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the talk. It was fascinating. I have a very dumb question, if I may. You started talking about it at the end, right? I come from a machine learning background. I like volumes of data that's shared from which we can detect patterns. What is some real problems and danger that you can see from actually sharing my information with big companies and providing them with that volume to generate more patterns out of?
I think that's an interesting question. It kind of depends on your personal, how you feel about it. So there are many people in the world who don't mind to share their data, who just upload their entire genome, all their blood work to the internet. And I think it's very nice because then we have a lot of data to research upon. Now the problem is that there are also people who don't want to do that. For example, if one interesting example was athletes, so high-profile athletes. For them, it's kind of the secret sauce as to what makes them go, what makes them function, and it's also kind of a competitive advantage. So for them, it is extremely important that competitors don't really get access to any health data. Or the other problem is that if you do a blood work and it comes out really bad, and if your insurance company gets hold of that, then you're having issues. And generally, it's very hard to say why you should keep it private. The answer is that probably, possibly, it doesn't matter. But at the point where it does matter, it's too late to take it back. And I think that's really the core of the solution, that once it's out, it's out, and you cannot undo it.
Thank you very much for the great talk. Companies like 23andMe spectacularly failed. How do you imagine future companies, the business case of future companies could look like?
Well, with 23andMe, that was kind of one of the biggest issues is the question the fact that 23andMe went bankrupt, that they sold off the genomes? If that's the question. From a business case-wise, one of the problems with these sequencing companies is that sequencing doesn't really generate constant revenue. So they need to, once they sequence you, they kind of need to hold on to the data and try to explore other avenues of revenue. And that means if they need to build up a big database and try to somehow monetize it, then that's kind of a honeypot. And so I think that model where you build up a big database is not an ideal model. And I don't really see that as, maybe there will be some big companies like Google or somebody who can keep it safe, but for most little companies, they won't be able to keep it safe. So I would prefer them not to have it. And in such a model, if it's completely self-sovereign and on your person, then it doesn't matter. that's kind of the nice part about this idea, is that if the company building this goes bankrupt, it doesn't matter. It doesn't hold your data, it cannot sell your data, it cannot lock you out of your entire anything. That's the world I would like to live in. There will always be exceptions, but...
Thank you very much. We are unfortunately out of time, but I'm sure, Peter, you're available afterwards for questions, no? One round of applause for Peter.
You can find me for the next 3 days here, so feel free.
Fantastic. Amazing. Our next speaker is going to be